Well, you've written a lot about this personhood.
Yeah.
This sort of, it's a concept. It's a key concept in your understanding about medicine and the activity of medicine. And I think we both agree it's not scientific or a scientific concept. And I was wondering if you could say more about that, in particular, just in the relationship to this things we've been talking about.
Well, love isn't a scientific concept either. And neither is taste. And neither is everything else that you really think is important. They're all in the line of values. Do they then not exist? So the fact that something isn't a scientific concept simply means that for that concept, a person, or love, or taste, you apply other standards besides scientific ones. Science is good for what science is good for. If you can't measure it, you have a tough time making scientific decisions about it. And persons aren't measurable in those ways. In the thing. Now, the thing about person, watch out because this is my thing. But, it's a disease-centered medicine, as I explained, starting back 200 years, and it can go all the way up. And it's a disease-centered medicine all the way up until the Second World War. Not everywhere, because even in the 20s, there were people who were saying we have to pay more attention to the particular person. But after the Second World War, patients became persons. And you think that, weren't they persons before? Oh no, they were patients. Well, what's the difference? Oh, persons have agency. They're considered able to do things for themselves, not patients. Patients weren't considered to have agency. Now, I had this funny thing. I took care of a man who was the president of one of the big movie companies, and he had pneumonia. And this must have been in maybe 1960 something. Anyway, I'd been into the hospital, and his wife and I went to the room, and I explained what was going to happen. And then his wife and I went out in the hallway, and we had the conversation. Now that was, in those days, that was the real conversation. See? They didn't necessarily tell him the truth. I did actually then, but people didn't necessarily. But with the wife and I, we had the real conversation. Try that today. What's changed? Well, what's changed is patients have become persons. We don't treat persons that way. Well, when did that happen? Well, in 1954, when I was getting out of medical school, people were talking about treat the patient as a person. That literally means treat the patient as if a patient was a person. And in fact, funny as it is, that's what it meant. But then what else happened from 1954 until, let's say, 1970? Who else became persons? Women in public. They've always been persons in private, but women in public. The civil rights movement. The women's movement. Coming all the way up to the gay movement. The rights of persons with disabilities, which is the most recent one. All these are people who have achieved personhood in our society. Now, it's a strange thing, but that means that people are treated differently. The society treats them differently. Well, patients were like that too. So, when we see this particular administration, which is really different, oh God. And we also see it's in a different world. So the medicine that we're talking about is in a different world. So when I say we want a person-centered medicine, it's because we're now dealing with somebody different than the persons who were sick up until, in Paris, in that Paris hospital, when a person died, they did autopsies. And if it was inconvenient to do it somewhere else, they did it in the patient's bed. which must have been a bit of a shock to the guy in the next bed. Which means they didn't give a shit about him. Right? Well, we don't do things like that anymore. And not because we are nicer, just like doctors don't lie to people the way we used to when I was first in practice. It's because then we were liars and now we're not? No. The world changed. We weren't lying, we were doing what we thought was best for that person. And lying was part of it. Now, we don't believe that. But there are times when I promise you don't really want to know the whole truth. Not maybe yet today, how about tomorrow? So, the world has changed. Now, the thing that's interesting is, about persons and sickness is, who you are as a person, the particular you, makes a difference in what kind of illness you have, in when it comes to attention. I mean, supposing you have diabetes, but you're a runner, and somebody else is slothful. The slothful person with the same predisposition to diabetes, who eats the same way as you do, although that's probably unlikely to, he's the same, is going to have their diabetes show up earlier than you, the runner. Is that because you're better or whatever? No, it's because who you are changed how diabetes behaves. And the slothful person will change. So the way the disease presents itself, supposing you come in at the first sign of illness, you have a sticky toilet seat, and you say, my toilet seat was never sticky before, I wonder what's making my toilet seat, and I say, I wonder if you have sugar in your urine. That makes a sticky toilet seat. That's a piece of information you may not know. Anyway,
Watch out.
you'll come in right away, and that person over there, your patient who doesn't want to take his Lipitor, doesn't like doctors. How could that be? And doesn't want to go to the doctor. And trusts doctors and so forth. That person comes in later. So the first one's going to alter who the person is, alters how the disease presents itself. It's going to alter how when the diagnosis is made. Suppose you don't like X-rays and you don't want to, whatever. Then you don't get it and somebody else does. But that's you affecting your disease. Mostly when you say people affect their own diseases, people run right up to some unconscious thing. There's a 5-year-old with the controls, and that's what's doing it. But it isn't that. It's in all these everyday ways. So you alter when your disease shows, how it's diagnosed, and you alter the treatment, like your man with Lipitor. His hypercholesterolemia is different than mine. I couldn't be happier to take that. Because it works. Well, I care. And I have insurance, and so, So anyway, and then what happens to him and me and you and whatever is going to be different. And how it all ends up is going to be different. So the person has an effect on the disease. And not only that, the disease has an effect on the person, right? And when something affects you, that changes the way you behave, so you change it, which changes you, which changes it, and so forth. Well, that's a lot more interesting than diabetes is a disease of sugar metabolism, which probably isn't what it is. It's probably a disease of fat metabolism. But in any case, so that's much more interesting. If you look at it just as diseases, then it's all that stuff that we're talking about. But if you look at it as persons, then you have to know as much about that person as you know about the disease. Well, does anybody know a lot about persons? Not usually. By the time doctors are finished, they've learned a fair amount about persons. Unfortunately, they needed that at the beginning.